Our philosophy, this is the one familiar thing you will see through every budget presentation that I've ever given, and that's our philosophy. The only difference was the first bullet point with getting our kids through a pandemic didn't exist my first few years, but I want to remind everybody, this is the philosophy of which we develop our budget process for. Most important thing right now is getting our kids through a pandemic. I realize that we have learned to live in COVID is still here. We don't see the daily percentage rates and the mandates and all the things that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years. And by no means, I am not in the prediction business. If I was, the Cowboys would be playing the Giants this weekend. So that'll tell you how good I am. But one of the things I distinctly remember having a conversation for, and I believe, Mr. LeBlanc, it was you and I on a virtual meeting, was this is going to be with us for a while. And what you're going to see through this process is, although the COVID part of this may seem as if it's over, but the effects that it has had on our kids is not, and it's going to be with us for some time coming. Our other philosophy is to stretch our funds as far as we can. We know we don't have unlimited resources. We'll get into some of the funding streams later that are going to disappear. But the most important thing that I could present is sustainability. I don't want to lose anything we have. I don't believe we can afford, not financially, but for what we actually produce for our kids, we can't afford to lose anything that we currently have. So the philosophy hasn't changed over the last couple of years, and you're going to probably see the same thing next year if I'm sitting here. There is a different perspective this year. So I won't go through every single one, but I'll just highlight as a reminder for those who maybe haven't been watching board meetings since September. But we started off the beginning of this school year with our equity statement. And then we had a very robust social emotional learning presentation from Julie Carroll and her staff. I had mentioned, and I've also put in communications, we had to do some restructuring down at central office. I gave you guys a brief presentation on state data that came out of EdSite. It was really, the foundation of that was the definition of a high needs student. And we'll get into that a bit. It was sort of culminated a few weeks back when Michelle Middleton came and presented our academic data, and obviously everything progresses and culminates this evening with the budget presentation. I want to take a step back, though, and remind everybody where we started this year, and that's our equity statement. Now, I didn't write this. I was part of it. We started this process like we did with our district motto, where we started with administrators over the summer because they were here. But whenever all staff came back, we sent it out and asked for input. Ultimately, on September 13th of this year, we as a district, not you as a board, got behind this that we wanted to present publicly, and I'll read it one last time, that we believe every child is unique, and the diversity of our students is what makes Enfield Public Schools exceptional. To thrive and excel, all are welcome, accepted, respected, and supported, period. That evening, although you weren't required, the board actually changed the rules and adopted it as your own on September 13th. And I don't know if it was formally adopted, but I was told at the next town council meeting that this equity statement was actually endorsed by the town council as well. That's significant because the two largest governing bodies in town, in addition to the largest department in town, are all behind the same thing. It was important for us to start with this because I understand that a lot of people have a different definition of what equity is or what it means to them. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but we needed to be very clear on what equity meant to us. Because if we spent most of our time trying to argue that, well, this is what we meant by, or this is what our intentions were, we would never accomplish anything. So it was important for us to come out of the gate and define, this is what we're working of. You can have your own, and I welcome other people's opinions, but this is ours. And everything that we do is going to be focused on this. But what does it mean? I mean, the reality is these are just words, but our actions have to mirror what our belief system is, and this is a belief statement. So the most important first step is the creation of the Director of Educational Equity. You guys have all met Ms. Cox-Blackwell. She's fantastic. You all know that. I don't need to go through that whole process, but that was just one of the first steps. One of the other things that we had to do over this summer was we needed to restructure all the professional development that we give for our entire staff, focusing and including equity. It was just something we hadn't necessarily done consistently throughout the district. So you can ask any staff member or any teacher, don't ask them tomorrow because PD got canceled, but you can ask any staff member that you know about if we're putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that we're embedding equity in what we're doing. We also had to make a commitment to an equity review. As we shared with the board, Ms. Cox-Blackwell shared, is that we've contracted with CREC to complete that review. That also includes you guys. As you know, next Wednesday, you have your equity review meeting with the team from CREC. So this was something, by signing on to that statement, you guys are embedded in that process as well. But although this seems like a lot, and it has been a lot in a short period of time, we still have a lot more work to do, and you'll see that embedded when we start talking about dollars and cents. The next presentation was on social and emotional learning. And just like with equity, there's a lot of different definitions when it comes to acronyms in education. People see SEL and they think it's one thing. They think it might be something they heard on television or they read on social media. It was very important for us to define what social and emotional learning was. Fortunately, we didn't have to recreate a definition. The State Department of Education actually produced the definition for us. So on the screen is not only the state definition, but also the American Association of School Counselors, the American School Counselor Association definition. I'm not going to read it, it's there for the taking, but on September 27th of this year, you got a pretty robust presentation about all of the different social and emotional learning components that we have in the district. What some of you realized that evening was SEL opportunities are not just in special education. It's not just school counselors. As you can see on the screen, people who provide SEL opportunities are general ed teachers, special ed teachers, counselors, psychologists, social workers, speech and language therapists. I won't read the whole thing. It's up there. You could see it. But you get the point. That was an important second step. We talked about having to restructure central office a bit. And the reality is that our kids' needs have changed, and we needed to restructure in order to change with them. And by creating these new positions with existing people, mind you, these weren't 4 new positions, we had to make a direct link to make sure that we were helping the needs of our kids. So obviously the educational equity director position we talked about with Altressa is sort of self-explanatory. But when we talk about restructuring, putting people in roles to better support the needs of our kids, one of the areas was talent development. What does that mean? Well, that means that our teachers are struggling. And right now, the way that the process is teachers have an evaluation process, but that's just like you guys in your jobs. You have your boss telling you what you did or did not do well. We lacked that coaching component. So putting somebody in the district that's a friendly face and, quite frankly, has a track record of being an amazing teacher before they got into administration, in order to coach teachers and administrators to make sure that we're tapping our resources to ensure that we're producing the best opportunities we can for our kids through our staff. I'm going to skip down the Director of Strategic Development and Partnerships. It's a long way of saying you guys know John Daig. Mr. Unghire, at the last meeting, you gave an update about a field trip where our kids were lucky enough to take up the Boston Scientific. Those partnerships, those opportunities, those aren't just things that we do during the school day. Now, you orchestrated that, but there's a million other opportunities that we have. And there's even more opportunities out there that we don't tap for our kids, but we needed to have somebody who was directly focused on that. We have the right people. We just had to clear their plate a little bit in order for them to expand on that. That also includes partnerships that we have with private industry, with additional educational facilities, our Nantucket partnerships, our partnership with Springfield Technical Community College. All of that stuff falls under the guidance of John's office. The last one, the Director of Innovation, you're going to know more about that at your next meeting, because I know I told you that Dr. Wiley's going to come and explain one of the things that she's working on in our elementary schools. But some of you had the opportunity to attend a digital literacy night. If you have any questions on exactly where we're going, you'll have a pretty good idea after you get wowed by what Dr. Wiley does. What we needed the public to see and parents to see is we have a lot of resources in town. But what we need to do is close that gap to let families know that these resources are there for them and for their kids when we don't have their kids for 6.5 hours a day. That process has started, and it's only going to expand from there. Talking about the Ed Site presentation that I gave. So it was a presentation. It was really just more playing with the website and showing you the bubbles and all that stuff. And I had this in front of me when I did it, so I'm going to move my mic and try to read off of this one. Just for those who may not be familiar of what this was. But the state defines a per pupil expenditure per percentage of students who qualify in one of 3 areas, whether it's special education, free and reduced lunch, English, or English language learners. Now, the state will calculate this percentage of high-need student per school. So what the state does is they take your population in the particular school or in the district, and they take those three components. This isn't our definition. This is the state of Connecticut's definition. And within those three categories, they will determine how many students of high needs each school or district has. Just to put it in perspective, Enfield High has 46.3% students population of high needs. JFK is 55.8. Now remind you, take a step back, this is old data. Remember I told you this was 2020. These numbers are only going up. It runs the same data schedule that we do for everything else. Prudence Crandall is at 60.6, Whitney's at 58.8, Parkman at 56.3, Memorial at 54.8, Enfield Street at 49.6, Henry Barnard at 58.9. What that means is it averages, as you can see, about 50% at every building, some a little higher, some a tick lower. 50% of our kids are defined by the state of Connecticut as being high needs. That is every other kid in a classroom, every other desk. That's if you look around the room, when we start with Morgan and then we go to Mr. Hamry, every other person is defined by the state of Connecticut as being of high needs. I've been preaching that our district has changed. Our kids have changed, the needs have changed. This is validation that it's not just me saying it, the state is telling us your kids have changed and you need to adjust to make sure you're reaching the needs of your kids. And the last presentation was on academics. Going back to the previous slide, these are who our kids are and these are what their needs are, and we need to make adjustments. We also have to be honest that academic regression is real from COVID. We're not just making that up. I know some people will say, well, that's just an excuse. That's fine. I can respect that, but it's also real. One of the things that was most alarming when we're looking at this year's assessment data, and again, assessment data is a bit skewed because it's taken early in the school year with the expectation of where kids should be at the end of the year, but the reality is when we looked at our assessment data for kids in transitional grades, it was alarming. And it's more alarming because we know that those kids are leaving soon. Granted, they're staying in town, they're going to another school, but think about that, those of you who have children. Those transition years, when your kids are going to a new school, new principal, new teacher, in some cases, new friends. Some cases going from being the oldest kid in school to back being the youngest kid in school again. Remember when you guys were freshmen? That's real. Transitional regression is a real thing, and we're experiencing that. And one of the things that we're putting direct efforts in now, as I shared last week, was putting targeted interventions in for those kids. We posted the positions where I know some people have reached out and they're willing to help, and I appreciate that. But one of the things that we're making a concentrated effort in right now is for those transitional grades, our kids in 2nd and 5th grade, to do everything we can to get those kids up to speed before they leave and go to the next place. Because once they're gone, we already have those natural regressions through transition that are going to affect those kids. So Michelle spent a lot of time. I know the curriculum subcommittee talks a lot about this, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that you'll see when we're talking about making sure we maintain what we have, that this is at the heart of it. So where do we go from here? So the old way that we did things does not meet the needs of our kids today. It just doesn't. Believe me, it's a lot easier for me to roll out the same presentation and change the numbers. To be quite honest, I would have preferred it. But that's not fair. That's not where we are. That's not where our kids are. And we need to look at this budget process differently than we have in the past. And this is a reminder. This is usually a time of year, and I'm glad that the invocation was centered around Mr. T-Katz. I've known Mr. T-Katz a long time, and I used to have a lot of knockdown arguments with him, but at the end of the day, it was always respectful. Because this is the time of year where everybody becomes an accountant. So our funds are not a spreadsheet. Our funds are a reflection of what we believe in and the supports that we provide for our kids. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of change the lens into how we look at how we spend our money. I also understand that this can get pretty cumbersome if I really wanted it to. So I needed to consolidate this down to a way that I can translate it at a microphone. Instead of doing 25 different categories, I came up with 4. I shouldn't say we came up with 4. And the first one, yellow means nothing to you now, but when you actually get the budget document, it'll make sense to you because we color-coded stuff because I was getting confused. But the first category that we're now looking at the budget through is supports. And it seems like it's pretty blanket, but supports are anything that goes directly to supporting kids, but not strictly academic. So we talked at length during our SEL presentation. All of those components, those aren't necessarily reading, writing, and math, but those are components that are necessary to support our kids. Counselors, social workers, behavioral techs. I talked about English language learning. That's something that's not strictly academic, but it's things that we have to supply supports for kids for. So looking through that lens of where the funds are going for that particular area, it's not strictly academic, but it's the things that we still have to do. Health and safety is a big one. You know, obviously coming out of a pandemic and looking across the desk, you know, masks aren't free anymore. That was in previous years. We don't buy them anymore. But in addition, it's not just physical health and physical safety, but it's emotional health and emotional safety as well. School security is a big one. And I know that's on every parent's mind. And trust me, I'm a parent, I'm a school superintendent. It's on my mind too. I can't get into a million specifics, but I can tell you that we're putting a large number of resources into school facility measures. We talked during the SEL presentation about the role of behavioral techs and paraprofessionals. Administration and support staff. People think you're school building principals, you're just an instructional leader. Newsflash, they're not. They're the first line of defense in a crisis. In a perfect world, you can ask any school principal what they do every day, and they would tell you that I'm in classrooms and I'm looking at academic data, but in reality, they're dealing with you guys. They're dealing with parents. They're dealing with somebody, if it's an elementary school and somebody lost their backpack, then that's the first place they're going. If somebody's angry, that's the first place that they're going. So that's actually broken down, and we figured out a way to break down percentages of what some administration staff actually does in support as well as academics. So it'll look a little bit different. I can't talk about academic and support staff and supporting kids without talking about our real frontline workers. That's our school secretaries. Every single one of you who've been in a school, that's the first person that greets you. When something goes wrong or somebody forgets something, that's the person who takes care of it for you. When your kid forgets their lunch or their sneakers or their $1 for pajama day, that's the person you're going to meet. We need to separate exactly how we're paying for certain things, but all of it is equally important. Nutrition. We can't support our kids if they're hungry. So that falls into the support category as well. And there's one that we don't talk about as often as we should, but I wanted to make sure that I highlight it, and that's alternative education. Alternative education traditionally has been thought of as, and I won't put this particular person on the spot, but I'm going to. It used to be called Malley Academy. So traditionally, alternative ed was for students who were going through the expulsion process. But what we recognized over the time was we had a lot of kids that were the traditional 6.5-hour school day didn't work. And some of the options were these kids would pursue, if we were lucky, going through a GED program, or in some cases dropping out, or could we actually intervene and give these kids designated programs to make sure that they graduated from Enfield High School? And we've done that. We've done that because we have the space and the resources and, quite frankly, the right people, of which Mr. Malley is one, and through our alternative ed program. But that's a support for kids. That's not written anywhere of just being an academic program. That's a program that if we didn't have in place, those kids would not graduate, or those kids would end up going to get their GED. Now, that's not necessarily, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we can get those kids to graduate with their high school diploma, that's the end game, folks. That's the goal. So I've asked Ms. Crosati to come present here, and there's been times where she's said no because some of her kids will take her away, but I will get her at some point. That's just one we haven't been able to do yet, and I thought it was important to highlight this evening. The next category is pretty self-explanatory. That's academics. That's going to be your orange section when you get your actual documents, but that's everything. Those are our teachers, our instructional supports, our professional development. I mentioned PD earlier. Well, guess what? We have to pay for that. Technology is an interesting one. When I first started this, technology wouldn't have been considered academic. Technology would have been considered a nice to have. And I remember an old friend telling me that technology should be a utility while he was going nuts. It was Mr. Neville. He was right. And now in today's world, technology is not an option. Technology is a way that our kids have no choice but to learn. We don't have an option about providing our kids with technology. Now, there's other technology we'll get to in a moment. Our curriculum, I know that the state guides us on what we do for curriculum, but we still have to write it, we still have to review it, we still have to pay for it in some cases. That's where the funding comes from, as well as academic supplies and materials. If you see kids coming home with books, guess where they came from? They came from that bucket. We just came out of the holiday season. A lot of our little guys came home with some sort of holiday card, or if it was probably red or green construction paper, that's how we paid for it, out of that bucket. The next one is the one that's going to take, I think, first of all, I don't know if it's the right color. I'm calling it purple. When you see it, it may look like a magenta. I don't know what that is, but I'm calling it purple. But this is the category that I think it's important for the public to understand that we're referring to as opportunity and access. These are the things that we're not required to do, but we do them because it's good for kids. Okay, these are our extracurricular opportunities that we have for kids. These are our music programs. These are our arts and theater. These are sports. These are elective courses. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but I know that our two friends, student reps here, know this. How many study halls you guys got? Those of you who can't see them, it's 0. Our kids at Enfield High School do not have study halls. That was by design. But in order to do that, we had to fill their schedules with something, and it was an opportunity when this community banded together and built a new high school. The commitment we made was kids should be taking as many classes, especially in elective areas that interest them, that make them college and career ready, and they shouldn't be taking study halls. And you, as a board, the town council, have honored that commitment, and they don't have a study hall. That's not required. We're not required to do that, but we do it because it's the best for our kids. Technology, we mentioned that. That's an academic tool now. We have no choice but to use that. But we have a lot of technology in this district that's not. You know, when we took the tour of JFK, through JFK, I overheard a lot of you going from room to room, and you happened to notice, I think it was you, Miss Akri, that said, where did all these signs on the doors come from? So every classroom had the teacher's name that was printed in from a 3D printer. That's technology. All those signs were made at JFK. We had to pull Mr. Hamry out of some of the labs because he was touching too much stuff. All that technology in there, that's not required. We don't have to have it, but we do because it's the best opportunity for our kids. Clubs, we have over 100 clubs at Enfield High School. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we have a lot of clubs at JFK. And these are not just traditional clubs that one would think is an extracurricular activity like sports or theater or music. We have clubs, and I would defer to the experts about some of the clubs because even I get confused at times on how many we have. But there are clubs and opportunities that they meet during Eagle Block because they don't have to have study halls anymore. That's not required. So if a kid is into photography, maybe we didn't have a photography course 10 years ago. Not only have a course, now we have a club. You're not required to, but it's good for them. School partnerships and career opportunities, I mentioned that earlier, that restructure with John Daig, but those partnerships that we have with Asnuntuck, with Stick, we have partnerships with private industries. We have companies come in and do job fairs at Enfield High School. There's a lot of things we do, but we have to pay for that at times in staff time and making sure we have people who are dedicated resources to do that. A lot of you participated in Career Day at Enfield High School. Anybody who went, did anybody have a bad time? That's because we have amazing people running the Career Center. Again, not required, but it's the right thing to do for our kids, and it's supported through this budget process for you guys. Later on this evening, when it's your time to talk, every single one of you, not you two on the ends, but the rest of you, are going to give an update on your schools, which is great. And you're going to talk about some sort of activity that your elementary school or the school that you represent is going to partake in. That family engagement piece, that's not done by accident. We supply some of our schools the infrastructure to engage with families to participate. So the events that you're going to talk about because it got changed because of the weather, but there's a literacy night. That's all supported under opportunities and access. And the way that it's in the budget now will show you that. This stuff's not free, but it's right. It's the right thing to do. Mr. Ryder's not here. He mentions it every time he comes. I know he's a mentor for some of our kids and we hear from, I just remember Mr. Salazar being inactive with our mentorship program and talking about how wonderful it was. That's not required either. But that's just these are just examples of things that fall into those opportunities for kids and access for kids. Things that we're not required to do, but we do them because it's right. But people need to understand it also comes at a cost. The last color, I was out of names, so I called it other by law. And in your document, you'll see it's the color blue. These are basically the things that we're required to pay for, even if we don't want to. Don't read into this, especially on bad weather. I'm not saying anything about Smith Bus. They are the best people in the world. I put transportation up there for a reason. I am not advocating to not drive kids to school. But the reality was, it doesn't matter if I did advocate for it, because the law says you have to. So even if you decided we don't want to drive kids anymore, it doesn't matter. You're paying for it. You're also paying for kids who don't necessarily go to our schools, but if they live in town and they go to a private school in town, you're giving them a ride too. You should. I'm not arguing with that. But people at home need to realize that's mandated. We live in a very litigious society. I'm sure no one here is shocked. But every time something like that happens, you have to pay the legal bill. I mentioned FOI. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at length in a moment, but people see freedom of information and they automatically assume that it's free. It's not. There is a cost to that, and I'll get into that in a second. Magnet school tuitions. If a student in Enfield or if a resident of Enfield applies and is accepted to a magnet school, and I'm not talking bad about magnet schools, that's a choice for a family to make. If that child gets accepted, and they're permitted to go, they're going. And you're paying the bill. And you're not going to cut a classroom teacher in a school to pay for that because it's 1, 2, 3 kids. Now, our numbers have been going down. But the reality is, if kids decide they want to go to magnets, we're paying for it, whether we like it or not. I also have to, because you're going to hear about this in a second, our special education costs. For those magnet school students that want to go, if they have an IEP and they get special education services, we're paying for that as well. The magnet school is not paying that bill. So it's important to know that there are a lot of things, and these are just some examples of things that we have to pay for, whether we want to or not. What people at home need to understand, we don't have a choice on some of this stuff. All right. No big reveals this year. I don't have somebody to come, pull a rabbit out of a hat. Our current budget is $73.2 million. That's how much we currently spend right now. Here's the old accountant hat. Everybody used to know, what's the fixed cost? So the fixed costs are, we keep everything we currently have. It's 3.96% increase over this current year's budget. I'm going to pause for a second. Andy's my market guy. What's inflation?
I don't know. I think latest 6.5%. I think
he follows this stuff all the time better than I do. That's why. So figure 6.5%. Our fixed cost, our inflation, is less than 4. Now, there's a reason it's less than 4, and we'll get into that in a sec. But you have to think of that in terms of the cost of doing things is more expensive now. All of you go to a gas station. You're paying more for gas than you did 2 years ago. So are we. If you have to buy something from a store, you're probably paying more for it because of supply chains and all this other stuff that we hear about. So are we. Now, we may get discounts because we buy things in bulk, but the discount doesn't cover the increase in price than it was the last time we bought it. Everything has gone up. We are not immune to inflation because we're a public school system. I wish it were different. It's not. But to keep everything we have, I need 3.96% over what we got last year. So that's what I'm asking for. Sit tight, because I know one of you ain't going to like it. But that makes our budget request $76.1 million, or a 3.96% increase. There's nothing new, but more importantly, nothing's coming out. And what really made this weird is what we're going to get into. But typically, that number includes something that's permitted by state law, and we have been very fortunate, at least in my tenure here, that the town council has approved, is including a 2% carryover. So what that means is if we save 2% of our current fiscal year's budget, the town council, through their generosity and appreciativeness, is part of the, it's not a proclamation, then the word is escaping me, the appropriation to the board, they allow us whatever the increase is that they're appropriating for us, let's say it's 2% or 4%, whatever the number happens to be, In that motion, they will also include that the board can carry over up to 2% of their current year's money if they have that available. So the town is saying, you don't need to give us any extra money you have back at the end of the year. Roll it into next year and give yourself a little bit of a cushion. We need to look at that 2% carryover as our reserve or break glass in case of emergencies. The glass was broken in September. That 2% that I typically, so last year I may have asked for a 3% increase, but it was really a 5% increase because, and don't hold me to the numbers, I can't remember off the top of my head, because I don't have it in front of me. I'm looking at the same thing you guys are. That always included that 2% carryover. And what that does is that helps soften the blow for what the board has to request. I don't have the 2% this year. Usually by now, and the reason we're doing this today and not 2 weeks ago is because I needed 2 more weeks to see if we can find the 2% to adjust that number. I don't have it. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't have it. And it's important for you guys and ultimately the town council and ultimately the residents of this community to know. There has been a drastic increase in our special education costs. This year, we have a 22% increase in special education referrals. Put that in perspective, that's over 150 additional students that are referred to the special ed process. Doesn't mean they have IEPs yet, but it means they've been referred. Any student that's referred through the IEP process requires evaluation that we are, again, mandated to do. And I'm not saying I don't agree with it, I do agree with it. But in order to do that evaluation, it has to be done by a psychologist, a school psychologist in most cases. We have school psychologists on staff, but we don't have enough to oversee a 22% increase in referrals. So what that means is if we don't have enough in-house staff to conduct these evaluations, we have to find somebody to do them. And when we go out into the marketplace to find somebody to do them, you're going to pay 10 times as much for that evaluation if we had one on our own staff member doing it themselves. That's what happened. And it's no one's fault. If I wanted to hire 10 more school psychologists and I had the money to do it and money wasn't an object, still can't do it. Good luck finding them. We're going to talk about staffing in a moment, but it's not feasible. And we're not alone in this, but the reality is the pace of referrals was something we couldn't predict. So that is a big contributing factor. Outplacements. Special education students whose programming in district doesn't meet their needs has drastically increased. The amount of students that are showing an alarming rate of significant mental health issues that require a clinical placement has increased drastically. Now, some people who follow this process may say, well, didn't you build Eagle Academy? Yes. These are not the kids we're talking about. These are kids who require clinical placements in more of a clinical, in some cases, hospital setting. We don't have that programming in district. But what happens is if we can't meet that programming need of those kids, then we have to support the outplacement and we have to pay the tuition for it. And we're talking about tuitions that can range from $50,000 to $150,000 per student per year. I hate doing this because people put a dollar amount on what a kid's need is, and it comes across as saying, I don't have any money because I got to pay. That's not it, but it's just reality. That's where the funding is going to. Going back to Eagle Academy, when we first built Eagle Academy, I stood in front of the board and the town council and said, I need 6 kids to break even. You want this program to be self-sustaining? We need 6 kids. I can cap it at 26. Anything above 26, between 6 and 26, we can function, but I can't take any more than 26. Even if some of those 22% kids that I mentioned earlier would qualify for Eagle Academy, I don't have any room for them because currently we have 27 kids at Eagle Academy. We're 1 kid above what we said the limit was, but we didn't want to turn 1 kid down. So I have no more room. It's a good thing it's a good problem to have, because it means we did it right and the process is working. We have other towns. I got a call today from a surrounding town that said, any chance I can get one of my kids in the Eagle Academy? And I had to tell them no. There's a wait list for surrounding towns to get their kids into our program. The reality is we just ran out of space. Staff retention, we're going to hear about that in a second too. But you have to look at this realistically. People are jumping ship. And then I used to take this personal, but the reality is I can't take this personal anymore. None of us can. I don't blame people. If a staff member we hired last June and we paid them $50,000 a year, and they come October, get a job offer from a town that's throwing money at them, and they make $70,000 a year, how do I look somebody in the eye and say, no, you shouldn't take a $20,000 pay raise? And before people ask the question, well, can't you match it? The answer is no. If that person has 3 years experience, I can only give them step 3, which got them the $50,000. If another district has a way to pay them more, they're going to be able to make more money somewhere else. But I can't say, all right, well, I'll pay you at 70 to keep you. And even though you have 3 years experience, I'm going to put you on step 9. Because we have like close to 200 staff members who have been here beyond 15 years, and they're only at step 9 because we've frozen steps so many years. So when we talked about the teacher's contract, one of the things I was adamant about was I'm not doing step freezes because this is the cost of it. And it's really, so why this is eating into that breaking glass and finding that 2%? Because if a staff member leaves in October, I got 2 options. Pay whatever I can to find somebody to take that job, or leave it open. And if I leave it open, that means you guys don't have a teacher. And depending upon the level, some of it's an actual classroom teacher that the kid is with all day. We don't have that luxury. So we have to do whatever we can to find somebody and put them in there. But the reality is, if someone's going to jump ship in October and come here, not to say they wouldn't want to be here and they're not excited about working in Enfield, but the reality is they probably have more than 15 years experience, which means that $50,000 teacher is now going to be an $80,000, $90,000 teacher, and I don't have any of this budgeted. So that's also part of the reason was we had to go into our reserves to cover things that we didn't anticipate happening. That wasn't in the budget. Nutrition. At some point tonight, one of you or somebody in the audience is going to ask, are we going to still feed our kids for free? I hope so. Traditionally, the way our nutrition services works, and some of you on the finance committee understand this, is that Diane Edwards and her staff do a remarkable job, not just with feeding our kids and taking care of our kids, but also running a good fiscal shop and making sure that money gets stretched as far as it can. One of the benefits through the federal reimbursement program and the rules under which the nutrition service program operates is they're allowed to carry some money, operating expenses over month to month for incidental things. So we make our own food. When you make your own food, you're allowed to keep money in reserve in your nutrition program in the event something goes wrong. If an oven breaks, if a warmer goes down, if a freezer blows. Fortunately for us, our 2 production kitchens are Enfield High and JFK. So Diane, as frugal as she is, realized I don't need to save the normal money that I have to, so over the summer I can buy a new oven or a transmission for the van or whatever the case is. I don't necessarily need that. So there's usually 2 options. You'll see in the budget every year, Nutrition Services reimburses the board about $390,000. To be totally honest, the last 3 years, she couldn't do it because she didn't have it because she wasn't selling any lunch. This was a year where she was able to maybe make that reimbursement back. That would ordinarily be a place I would go to help fund that 2% carryover. This year was different. The options were take money out of nutrition to carry it over into next year's budget or feed kids. Now, we talk every week about trying to feed kids as long as we can, trying to feed kids as long as we can. We have to pay for it. You know, the state did a nice job with the SMART funding at the beginning, realizing they had additional COVID money left over that they sent out to local districts to try, just for people watching at home may not know this, kids haven't had to pay for lunch throughout COVID for the last 2 years. So knowing that was about to expire, the state reutilized some of their COVID relief money and sent them to districts and said, continue to feed kids as long as you can. But eventually that money's going to run out. We were in a different position to say, rather than cut it off and tell everyone it's time you have to pay for lunches, to take some of those reserve funds that we ordinarily would have to buy new equipment for and do one of 2 things. I would usually go to Diane at this time of the year and say, I need to take some of that contribution to help fund the budget for next year. The other option was feed kids for free. Don't take this the wrong way, but if it means I got to ask for more money because I'm feeding kids, I'm going to feed kids. But that's where the money's going, folks. And the last one is one that I never thought I'd have to talk about, but I think in fairness to you and the people at home who may not know this, I referenced it earlier, and I have to be very clear when I state this. I don't want anybody to misread something or say God knows what. Dresdick said this. I have no problem with the Freedom of Information Act. I have no problem with, this has nothing to do with the press or the media, or I've asked some of the reporters who may call you guys, I've always said the same thing to reporters. Even when it's inconvenient, I know you got a job to do, and your job is to tell a story. That's not what I'm talking about here. Traditionally, our FOI requests that come into the district, they're pretty simple. It's usually around some sort of a contract, possibly a disciplinary letter or something along those lines. Give you an example. Bus consultants, notorious for sending an FOI request for our bus contract so that they can try to outbid Smith Bus when our bid comes up. Copy people, relentless. They're like solar people when you get on your cell phones. The copy people will send us FOI requests relentlessly. Those are easy fixes because they're public documents. We're a public agency. We take them. Doesn't take much review. It's all public. We charge them 50 cents a page. We give it to them. There are other requests that are typical, not just contracts, but employment contracts. Sometimes, a lot of times, word may get out to the media that a staff member got in trouble. So we'll get an FOI request for a disciplinary record. Those are easy to turn over because when that disciplinary record is written, it's written with the knowledge that this will become a public document, so we make sure that we don't put any personal violation information into the letter. So it's a matter of just taking them and sending them or allowing the people to look at them. Parents' FOI stuff about their kids. I have no problem with any of it. I really had no problem with all of it until this year. In the last year, the amount of FOI requests and the sheer volume of those requests are unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. And I've talked to a lot of colleagues who are amazed at the junk that we've had to produce. And this is where I think the public needs to understand. Freedom of information doesn't mean free for you guys. The person getting the information, it's free, but it's not for you. Let me tell you what I mean. The requests that we've gotten in the last 12 months, again, I don't want the media to think I don't want to talk to them. I don't, but they know that. That's not what I'm talking about. When we get a request that is so expansive that asks for every communication for the last 6 months between all 9 of you, me, the 11 town council members, with a word in it, those become so expansive, I can't just pull like a copier contract off the shelf and hand them to them because there are concerns of information that I legally can't turn over. There is, first and foremost, confidential, federally protected student privacy information in those. There is protected personnel information in those. There is HIPAA information in those. There are attorney-client privilege information that we're not legally allowed to turn over. So there's 2 options when we get an overwhelming request like that. And I'm not picking on one person here. This has been going on from a year from multiple people. When we get a request like that, I got 2 options. Pull all the information, send it out, and hope for the best and let the chips fall where they may. But I put at risk you guys. Because if I turn over something that I'm not supposed to, you own it. If I violate a kid's federally protected privacy rights, and that parent sees this, and they file suit against us, they're going to win. We talked earlier about we live in a litigious society. This is what I'm talking about. Or my other option is I've got to go through all of it from the eyes of a lawyer to make sure what I'm giving up, I'm supposed to give up. I'm not a lawyer. So every one of these giant requests has to go through our legal counsel. That going through our legal counsel cost money. To date, does not include January because I haven't got the bill yet, but we had a doozy in January. To date, we have spent $75,000 on these FOI requests. Not parents looking for information on kids, not the copy guy who asks me every year, not the bus people. FOI requests about every communication all 9 of you have ever had. And I'm not just talking about emails. I'm talking about phone calls, recordings of phone calls. I don't know about you guys, but I ain't Richard Nixon. Nobody's recording my phone calls that I know of. If you're recording it, you got it already. Even take that a step beyond. Having to produce logs of our phone calls to turn over. My question is, for what? Why? So some people can take shots at each other on Facebook? So that people can make silly videos and become stars online? I'm sure as these words are coming to my mouth right now, I'm on somebody's video. I'm okay with that because you know what? The video right now is free. But every time we get one of these expansive ones, those of you who, we've heard people come right to the dais and make reference to the information they got through an FOI request. Those of you who have seen it, if you've seen the redaction in it, newsflash, I didn't redact it. I don't have a black electronic Sharpie. Your lawyer did that. We are going to be over $100,000 this year for the size. We had an FOI request that was so large that we couldn't even transport the documents to the respondent. We had to actually pay our attorney to set one up on their server and give the person requesting the information a 7-day window to go in and electronically download it. Why? Did we better anybody's life by doing it? I don't know. I'm not in social media world, so maybe it was worth it. But you're asking me how I'm going to spend your money, and I'm telling you this is where some of it's going. And I understand the argument that people are going to say FOI is about transparency. You're right. I 100% believe you. I agree with you. But you know what else is transparency? What I'm telling you guys right now. Because the people at home, our taxpayers, our parents, our kids need to know when they need something and we can't do it, it's because we have obligations that we have to pay that we don't necessarily agree with. I'm going to pick on you because I know this question is coming. Excuse me. And I know it's coming because when I said this last week, I can tell by your question you didn't like it. But I told you guys at last meeting we're not having summer school this year. Now, staffing summer school is still going to be a challenge. But what we spent, and I just told you, that's 3 weeks of summer school. It's 3 weeks of summer school because we had to pay for this. That's my soapbox on this. Now I want to get back to what's important. The request that I'm asking for is 3.96%, maintains what we have. COVID relief funds, we talked about it. I spent my entire budget presentation last year talking about ESSER and ARPA and all that other stuff. If you want to do that again, I'll do it, but I'm really not in the mood to do it. One thing I got to remind you of, when we got all that funding, everybody was coming at us saying, what are you going to use it for? What are you going to spend it for? What are you going to spend it for? And I got killed because I kept telling everybody, wait, let's make sure we manage this because eventually there's going to be a cliff and we need to run it out. I asked him a question earlier. What's the inflation number? What'd you say?
6.5.
6.5. It's not magic that our number is 4. Our number should be 6.5. But because we managed our COVID relief money, that is embedded in the 4%. If we didn't save the money and spend it appropriately, we wouldn't have it next year. That number would be beyond 6%. So part of the reason last year I told you about how we weren't spending it all at once, a lot of the things that we're currently paying for, a vast majority of things that we're paying for in the SEL presentation, we're doing so with managing. Lorena has done a remarkable job managing legally because I get the reminders on a daily basis when there's an update to the grant from the state of Connecticut that says your grant request has been approved. We're managing the COVID relief money to stretch it as long as we can. Had we not had done that and spent it all when we got it, Your request right now, or mine, would be closer to 7% than it is to 4%. Most importantly, and this is the thing everyone needs to take away from this does not have any staff or program reductions in it. That is my priority right now. My priority right now is because this is not, every year we have unknowns. We spend a lot of time talking about them. This year's nuts. And let me tell you why. I got 2 retirements right now. Now, teachers aren't and administrators aren't required to tell us they're retiring until February, and that's a very personal decision, so I never try to push people. But the reality is, I'm not going to know how many retirements I got until you guys have to adopt the budget. So there's a lot of unknowns. We'll get more than 2. Every year we go through insurance stuff. Insurance is at 3% right now. That's a number not to exceed. With any luck, our claims usually decrease in the second half of the year. Again, I'm sounding like an accountant again. That number will go down, but it's not down right now. So the commitment we've always made to the council is this is what we think we need, but we know that number is going to come down, but we'll work on it. Change in personnel. I know people are going to leave. I hope they don't. If you're watching this at home, I'm sorry. Don't go, but people are going to go. And as new people come in, there are salary differences on who leaves and who comes in. I don't know that right now. I'm not comfortable telling you this is what I think it's going to be. The 2% carryover is the first year I haven't recommended that 2% being in there. But what I did was I froze this year's budget. I could deliver some real bad news to our administrative staff a few weeks ago and says no more money until we can try to balance the books a little bit to see if we can somehow attain part of that 2% in order to carry into going forward for next year. Alliance funding. You guys know we got designated as an alliance district. We didn't get any money. However, I find it hard to believe we won't. The problem is you're not going to know, and the council's not going to know because that's all contingent upon whether or not it gets approved in the state budget. This process is backwards. Walter still here? Former Chairman Crizel, sorry. I don't know how many years I heard you and Tom say that. This is backwards. It's backwards. We have to come up with a budget to the people who have to decide how much to give us. They have to come up with a budget to decide how much they're going to charge everybody. They have no idea where they're getting their money from because it comes from the state. It's nobody's fault. It's the process. It's the way it works. I just don't know right now. The last one is important. Educational cost sharing. That's the granddaddy of them all. That's the big grant that funds from the state of Connecticut that goes to the town of Enfield to fund education. There is currently a proposed bill. I don't believe it got out of committee yet, but the process is moving. There was also, and Madam Chair, you and I sat through a community workshop, with the school state finance project that I believe Representative Arnone sponsored. And they had asked you and I believe Mr. Crisati to participate in that, talking about school funding. There is a proposal, and I need to bring you back to where we talked about student data earlier, that would, I'm breaking stuff. I got to pay for microphones. Sorry. There is currently a proposal in the Education Committee and I believe Appropriations that hasn't gotten out yet, but it's out there, that would fundamentally change the formula for the ECS grant. If that were to go through, there are 2 components of that bill that are very important to us. I am on the Alliance Network committee. I've been asked to testify down in Hartford when they go to public hearing for this bill. I don't know if my testimony is going to be written or verbal right now, but either way, I will do whatever I'm asked in order to support this. The way the legislation is written currently, the change for the town of Enfield for ECS, the formula would no longer just be on population as a whole. It would be following not just the child, but the needs of the child. Going back to where I was about half hour ago, that high needs percentage of kids that we had, the money is going, so the higher your percentage, the higher your formula is. The way that the bill is written as it is right now would be an increase of almost $1.5 million in the very first year in ECS money coming to the town of Enfield. Now, that's how it's written now. There's another component to this bill. And that would no longer require local boards of education to pay for magnet school tuitions. So those two components, if they survive the legislative process, there's $2.5 million coming into this town without you guys doing a thing. That covers almost everything we're asking for here. The problem is, I don't know if this is real. It has to go through the legislative process. We're not going to know. Now, what we can do now is to advocate that this is something we would support. I'm certainly preparing to do that, and I will share with the board more information on its Bill 5003, House Bill 5003. It's on the Ed Committee right now. I will certainly share that information with you. You have an opportunity to see if you guys support that as well. But based on the current formula of this proposed legislation, that would be a drastic impact on the funding that we receive from the state of Connecticut. This is why I don't want to ask for, as someone said, a greedy budget, because I could ask for something that we may be in a weird position where we get more money in June than we thought we needed or wanted or asked for in January. I just don't know. Now, we could get to June and have no money. That's possible. It's always a possibility. I'm not going to give you something until I know I have it in my pocket. That's what makes this year so crazy. There are challenges that we have that this budget does not address. Staffing. We are at a crisis level. I got 10 current certified teaching positions that are open and not filled. Not for lack of trying. We don't have people. Morale. Local, state, national, pick, you don't need to take my word for it. Ask a teacher. Ask a teacher how they're feeling about their profession at the moment. Not ours, but somebody else's. It's the hardest this has ever been, and it's not getting any easier. Retention, keeping people. It is literally the Wild West. We're purging people left and right. I broke my own rule. I told our staff we're not stealing somebody mid-year because I wouldn't want that to happen to me. Rules out the window. When we're looking at 20 kids in a classroom and saying you're either going to a study hall or I got to steal somebody and I got somebody we can steal, I had to eat some crow and some of my superintendent friends and said, sorry, but I'm taking the person, and we work it out. But they've done it to us. It's not personal anymore. It used to be, it's not. One thing that's not going to help morale, all our elementary teacher friends who just emailed me on my way over here saying, thanks for canceling PD tomorrow because I was worried about snow. Relax. We have done we've done an amazing job in this district at maintaining low class sizes, particularly at the elementary level. It's been, I am not proposing that we're going to 30 kids in a class, so everybody relax. Don't freak out on me yet, but you have to hear me out. We've been very lucky and fortunate to have the staffing to keep our class sizes as low as we can. That's been something that we've been really proud of. So we have some class sizes in elementary levels that are averaging 13, 14, 15 kids. Some are more toward 18, 19, but we try to keep that number under 20. That's sort of the magic number. The reality is, I think for the first time, our class sizes are going to have to go up. Now, I'm not going up to 25 and 30. I don't support that. But getting closer to 18, 19 as opposed to the 13, 14, that's something that I'm not going to have a choice to do at this point. It's not about money. It's not even about staff. If you gave me all the money in the world and you gave me an open season to hire 500 well-qualified teachers sitting right in front of it, I can't. I got nowhere to put them, which is the biggest challenge that I see facing us in the long term. So we need a reality check. We're full. At the elementary level, we are out of room. At Stowe, we're tapped. I couldn't come up with other adjectives. I'm currently in an arm wrestling match, a cordial one, with our friends at the town about space at Stowe. Stowe is the happiest place on earth. Anybody's ever having a bad day, go to Stowe. But somebody telling me that Stowe is not overcrowded, then clearly you haven't been to Stowe yet. The reality is, in 2 weeks, we're getting 20 more preschool special ed kids that I got no space for. So something's got to give. If I'm being truthful, we're out of room because our buildings are old. Our buildings were designed in the 50s and the 60s. The world's changed. The needs of our kids have changed. People are saying, what the heck is he talking about now? Bear with me and let me try to prove it. It's going to be hard for you in the audience to see, so I'll do my best to explain what this means. But the slide in front of you right now is Henry Barnard School's layout in the 2016-2017 school year. Now, not only are our buildings old, obviously so are our maps. Because anybody remembers going through the JFK process, those maps were a heck of a lot nicer than these, but this is what we got. I particularly wanted to show 16-17 school year because at the end of the 17 school year, if you guys remember, that's when central office was at Barnard. That's when we moved out and we moved special programming over to Barnard. If you can see where it says the Northwest Wing, I'll just take you quickly through. You can see if there's a number 1, that's a first grade classroom. Where it says, anything that says P, that's a special program, and the number after the P is how many staff members were in that room. So if you look on, I could see, you guys can't, room 9, that's Northwest Wing on the top and left, it says P4. That was a resource room, full-size classroom where we had 2 dividers and we had 4 teachers in there, and they would pull kids in for instruction. They would pull kids in possibly small group, but it was pretty roomy. It was a good opportunity for kids to come in and teachers to work in a pretty quiet and spacious atmosphere. But as you go down the hallway, you'll see like room 27 directly in the middle. That was the music room. The next hallway, you can see that's the second grade. And room 24 on the northeast wing on the bottom, that's the art room. Then you get down that center corridor where the all-purpose room is. Those were program rooms with 2, so there was 2 staff members in each room. You get to the southwest wing. That's where our kindergarten rooms were. And you can see on the bottom, room 6 and 8, and again, on top of that on room 7 where it says RR, those were resource rooms. So those usually had 1 special ed teacher in, and that's when they did resource or pull-out instruction for those 1 kid. So those are full-time classrooms that we had the luxury of having 1 or in some cases 2 staff members. You can also look on the left-hand corner, P3, that's another full-size classroom that had 3 staff members in it. And then you look at the southeast wing, that's where we used to be. So you could see in the corner, there's our old conference room where some of you guys remember. Human resources, special ed, the academic office was there, and it's a weird setup over there. And then the very front row is where the superintendent's office was, the deputy superintendent at the time, Kathy's little cubby. Judy had a cubby on the other side. We had a nice closet and stuff over there, but it worked for the time. But that's what Barnard looked like, you know, a little over 5 years ago. This is what Barnard looks like now. Anything in green means it's not what it was in the 16-17 school year. So just making a comparison on the top hand left, going back to the northwest corner. So that P4, which used to be a special program, that's our OT and our PT room right now. Where in the old days, you know, we used to have 4 staff members in there. We've got 5 staff members in that room now doing PT and OT services in the same space where we used to do pull-out instruction on. Draw your attention from the northwest wing back toward the center. You know, on the old map, room 15, there was a 1, then there was a storage room, and then I brought to your attention room 27. You could see now where it says P5. That was the music room. That's a special program now with 5 staff members in it. The room next to it, where it says storage, has 3 staff members in it. If you go down the hall, room 18 used to be room 2. That's a program room with 5 staff members in it. One of the good things, if you look at room 24, it still says art room. Don't get used to it. It's an art room now. It's not going to be next year. Going down to the southwest wing where it says P, where it used to be kindergarten rooms, we had to shift some. Remember the last one that had a bunch of RRs, those are resource rooms, were intervention. Those are actual classrooms now, so that whole room 1 through 8 are all kindergarten classrooms. The last rooms on the wings are special programs where we've got 5 and 5 staff members in respectively. If you take a look at where central office used to be, just to put in perspective on what we're utilizing this space for. The old HR office where we used to have 2 people in there. We now have a program where we have 5 staff members working out of that office. Our old pupil services suite, where our pupil services office used to be. We now have 12 staff members working out of that space that used to have 4 people in it. We used to have what's called a tech closet, where I can say this now. Back in the old days before these were mandatory, Guy used to keep like all of our mouse pads and our cords. It was a closet. That closet now has resource staff members in it working out of the closet. The old academic office, that used to be where Michelle Middleton's office was, and Dr. Wiley and Dr. Burr. We used to have 4 or 5 people over there. They got 6 people working over there, and we have 1 speech language pathologist in a closet. Something on the map that just says closet, we have it listed here on storage. We have an SLP working out of a different closet over in that wing. Kathy just left. Her little cubby where she used to have to jump in to get to her desk, for those of you who remember that, that's a resource room now. Same thing with Judy's old office. The main office, I won't even get into. That's still in the center of the building, where it used to be a principal, a secretary, and then behind it used to be the nurse. Right now we've got a principal, assistant principal, 2 secretaries, 2 nurses, and a security guard. This isn't trying to be alarming. It's just going back to what I said earlier. We don't fit. Now, this is just Henry Barnard. I can do this for 6 other places, but I've already gone pretty long. So I thought it was important, while I had your attention, that not everything in a budget process is about money. It's also about having a conversation about, can we do things differently and can we do things better? I haven't gotten into the academic piece of it, but looking at this strictly from a space perspective, when I tell people, when I have conversations outside of these meetings and says it's getting pretty tight on space, some people who've been in town for a long time will say, well, you have the same amount of kids. You're right. We do. But the needs that our kids have today are a heck of a lot different than they were 6 years ago. And the best way I could figure out on how to articulate that was to show people, this is how they lived, this is how they live now. And it's like that at all of our buildings. So what does this all mean? When it comes to the budget piece, my commitment to the community has always been, I'll work to get the number down. But there's just so many unknowns at the moment that I'm not comfortable cutting that down. The reality is, we talked about FOI stuff. I had a line item in the budget for FOI, but that means I had to take something else out. I'm not doing it. It's your budget next. I'll explain to you the process in a second. But the reality is, I'm still going to work to get this number down, but there's a lot of questions that we need to answer first. We, meaning all of us in this room right now, and all of the 11 members of the town council, we need to work together on this. I've sat through this process enough times where both bodies don't talk, and nothing good comes from that. We've been very fortunate over the last 5 budget cycles where there's an open line of communication with the board and the council. There's no surprises. Maybe they can't fund everything we're asking for, understandable. But at least we're being honest and upfront with the council about where we stand on all this. Look, I'm going to say out loud what I know everyone's thinking right now, but we probably need to start talking about what are we doing with the elementary schools. Now, I'm not proposing anything at this point, but I have to remind all of you guys, I have the easy part. I go first, and I just tell you what we need. Town manager has the hard part, because she not only has to meet the needs of what we're looking for, she has to meet the needs of the town. You have to remember that the town also pays for our facilities. So when we're asking, this is why I'm not being greedy, because I know she's got a giant bill to pay for a bunch of old buildings that she has to balance. So it's easy for me to say, give me 10%, I'll do some awesome things. That's great. But then are we not going to have a roof or a boiler or things along those lines? So it's a balance, which is why we need to keep that level of engagement with our colleagues on the town side up. Look, older buildings cost more to operate. That's just facts. I mean, they're not exactly energy efficient. I mean, we've got windows that aren't as energy efficient as, say, the best windows we have now at JFK and Enfield High School. If we're going to talk about new buildings, we need to see what's that going to look like. I'm saying this because I can already imagine the Facebook crowd saying, he's talking about doing this. Nope, I'm not. I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about, at some point, we have to have a conversation about what direction do we want to go. Do we want to keep on this path? Then Ellen and I have to have a conversation about how much she needs to fund these buildings, and that's going to have an adverse effect on what I can ask her for to operate the buildings. Or do we want to start having a conversation amongst all of us about what's the long-term strategic plan here? Last but not least, I can't say enough, in this proposal, there are no current cuts to staff or programs. Right now, I'm not comfortable doing that because there are so many unknowns. My priority goes back to what we started with. Get our kids through this, do what's right for kids, and keep what we have. That said, I will end with this. Typically, we've had the board adopt in the same night. We've had the board wait a week. Your obligation is that we have to have this on the manager's desk by end of February. So I would ask, if you're not going to vote on this evening, that you would vote on this at your next meeting to give us time to make sure we have our ducks in a row and to give Ellen as much time to prepare to do her budget for the town council. Obviously, my work continues if you guys have questions, but the reality is this is now yours. You can do with it what you wish. If you want to add to it, you can add to it. You want to subtract to it, you can subtract to it. This is the superintendent's proposed budget. The budget that goes to the council is the Board of Ed's budget. Now, we've been fortunate that the last couple years, it's been the same thing. Surely I would endorse that, but in reality, it's yours. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm telling you this is what you need to do. Like I said, I have the best part of this job because once I say I'm done unless I have to answer your questions. So that concludes the superintendent's report and our budget presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Drezek. Item 8, audiences.